When it comes to vintage chronograph watches, as far as I'm concerned, the Valjoux 72 is the king. It is a beast of a chronograph. It doesn't let you down. It's an absolute workhorse as well, apart from the one that I just received. The question is, why is it not running? I received an Enicar Sherpa Graph Mark IV for inspection and to find out exactly why it's not working. Well, I was a bit surprised when I found out, and I'm sure you guys will be as well. Guys, welcome back to Horology Biology. In this video, I am going to strip down a Enicar Sherpa Graph Mark IV, inspect it, find out exactly what's wrong with it, run it through the cleaning processes, and rebuild it. Hey guys, so we're going to get down on this strip down of this super nice Sherpa Graph Mark IV. As you know, they did 4 versions of this Sherpa Graph, this obviously being the last one, and I definitely think it's the most sporty looking one. Also, it's interesting to see as well that we recently discovered photographs, some of the other Enicar collectors, showing that the racing driver Gerard Mitter actually was sporting a Sherpa Graph Mark IV. So, that's a lot of things to think about now. I mean, how is that going to affect things in the future? Maybe price-wise, maybe from a collectability point of view, who knows? For me personally, I only think it's super fresh in regards to Enicar as a collectible item. It's more history, more racing history to add to this brand, and it's a win situation as far as I'm concerned. So I've opened up the case back on this super juicy watch, and as you can see, it looks super complicated. And it is, I'm not gonna lie. But the more that you work on these, the more that you actually get used to how it all operates, how it goes all together, etc, etc. And I must admit, it can look quite daunting. So I wouldn't just advise anybody just to practice on something like this. But the more that you do it, the more you get used to it, and the more you get used to exactly where everything goes and what everything actually does. So the first thing that I do in regards to this is I want to basically take the movement out of the case. That's the first most important thing, and it definitely helps. Interestingly, what you just saw as well, on the Valjoux 72s, they have 4 options, so 2x2, of where to have the movement case holders. Now they have 2 which are on each side, obviously, well, all 4 are on the sides. 2 are really straightforward, and you just basically remove the screws and it's done. Now the other 2, and they're the most common ones to see, one of them is actually held underneath one of the springs. So you have to actually remove the spring out of the way prior to taking the watch out of the case in order to get to the movement holder screw. Bit of a bad design as far as I'm concerned, and considering that they actually have the options to have them in different areas, I don't know why they bother doing it in an area where it's annoying that you have to remove other things. Anyway, that's just my rant on movement holder screws. So the movement's out of the watch, and now it's obviously time to remove these hands. Of course, use plastic each and every time. I use a big ass piece of plastic. I don't mess around. I want to make sure that I cover all that dial. I don't want to scratch it. It's not my watch. Would not be fresh, would not be cool. So the little tiny hands, I remove these with a pair of hand levers. And as I've mentioned before, make sure that they're nice and sharp, so that you can get underneath them quite easily, and you don't want to scratch the dial. So the other hands as well, you can remove those also with a pair of hand levers, or you can use a Presto tool. With it being a chronograph watch, I advise more to use the hand levers, but if you can, and I do this sometimes, with the sweeper, the second chronograph sweeper, I will actually remove that with a Presto, but I will really look close with a loupe so that I can just touch underneath the sweeper hand and just pull it directly up away from the watch. See, the problem is that because there's a lot going on there, if you use the hand levers, there's a chance that you might bend that chronograph sweeper hand. And if it's painted, like on some of the Omega ones, for example, you might actually bend it that much that you crack the paint, and that's not fresh. So the dial's off, which was held in by 2 screws which are not on the side, they're actually on the base of the movement. Now that the dial's put away safely, obviously I can continue to break it down, so I just remove the dial washer and the hour wheel. inspecting everything as I go along, and of course I give it a thorough inspection off camera, because I'm doing this for you guys, not for me. So take off the Canon pinion with a Presto tool, comes off nice and easy. Friction fit, so you don't want to use a pair of tweezers for that, that would not be fresh. Use a Presto tool, it'll pull it off nice and straight, and less risk of you bending it or damaging it in any shape or form. And then once that's off, the next thing that I want to do is basically tackle the watch. This watch was completely not running, the crown kept on coming out, it wasn't connecting properly, the watch wouldn't wind at all. So we need to find out exactly why it doesn't wind, and this is where we're here now. So as I always do, I want to get the balance out of the way. It's not something that you want to mess around with, and it's not something that you want to potentially damage, especially with doing a delicate hairspring. So easiest thing to do is just basically just remove it first from the watch and put it away safely. You're just risking damaging it if you're going to leave it in there, especially while you're removing things, especially with springs under tension, etc, etc. Last thing you want is something slipping, ending up in that hairspring. No sir, not fresh, not cool. So once the balance is out of the way, the next thing that I basically want to do is I want to start tackling on the chronograph. And what I start to do is, before I start moving like major parts out of there, I basically want to remove a lot of the springs, just basically to remove the tension. It just makes things easier when you're removing parts, because if things are held under tension and you then suddenly remove it without removing the tension from the spring, chances are it's going to fly across the room, or you're going to lose the screw, and as you all know, it's not fresh. And Valjoux 72s are not cheap. They are expensive watches, and parts are also expensive. Another thing what I do as well is, people have asked me about this before. They say, you know, how do you know about all the screws, etc, etc. When it comes to the chronograph side of things, I simply just put the screws back where they came from. It's dead simple. First of all, it means that I'm not going to make a mistake, because a lot of these screws look the same, they're just slightly different lengths, etc, etc, and they need to go back in exactly the same place that they came in, because underneath, if they're too long, they're going to hit against the ratchet wheel or something like that, or the crown wheel, and the watch isn't going to wind, etc. So it's absolutely imperative that each screw goes back in exactly the same place that it came. And the easiest way that I was always told is, especially on something like this where there's a lot of screws, is just to simply, once you've removed the part, put the screw back in where it was. It basically, you're going to clean it anyway, so the screws are also going to get cleaned while it's in the wash. And when you come in to reassembling the watch, all the screws are already organized for you. You don't have to mess around. So just working my way around the springs, and there's around 4 on top of this chronograph module. And as you can see, I'm just putting the screws back once I've removed one of the springs. Dead simple. So super somber times at the moment for all my British people. Very, very sad to hear about the Queen passing. Not everybody's into the Queen. Me personally, I'm very much into the Queen, always have been. Some people might find that a bit strange or a bit surprised for someone like me to say that, but I don't know. I don't know if it's just a British thing or whatever, but this is somebody that has, been in my life my whole life. I've never known anything different. And of course it's not a family member, but it's something that has been there within the country, so to speak. And yeah, it feels very strange. So next week, everything gets put on hold. I will be going back over to the UK. It only feels right to be in the UK during a time like this, so I literally about 20 minutes ago just booked my trip over, so I'll be driving back over to the UK next week. Also get some time to spend some time seeing friends and with the family as well. But at a time like this, I only feel it's right to be on UK soil. So continuing with the chronograph, removing all of these parts, all of these wheels, all of these gears, inspecting as I go along, as you can see, and like I just said, putting back those screws where they came from. Seriously guys, take advice on that. It is the easiest thing to do, and sometimes things like this you don't actually realize, and then once somebody said it to you, you're like, oh shit, yeah, why don't I do that? It'll just save you a headache. So I'm just taking off the chronograph. I'm gonna say bridge, and I think it is a bridge, but it's actually one screw, so it's a cock. So we're gonna call it a chronograph cock here. It's a chronograph cock. It's a CC. And underneath that, it's holding up the chronograph runner wheel and the minute runner wheel. And these are mad expensive, so you really want to take care of these, especially the chronograph runner wheel. You could be paying up to something like 150 to 200 euros for a replacement of one of those if it's damaged. So you really need to take care of them. So as you can see, the vast majority of all the chronograph parts have now been disassembled, and what I'm doing now is I'm just turning the movement upside down, and I'm just going to concentrate on the rest of the chronograph parts, because on the Valjoux 72 the 12-hour chronograph parts are actually on the dial side. And I'm just inspecting to find out why this watch wasn't winding or anything. One thing I did notice, that the setting lever was loose, and also that you could see as well there that the yoke had jumped over the winding pinion. So obviously you couldn't set the times or anything like that. So that's also a good indication of why it doesn't want to wind. But as you can also clearly see, the setting lever is broken. The screw snapped. The screw is completely snapped, and part of it is actually in the setting lever. So that basically says it there. Now you might find that my voiceover is a little bit strange here, and the reason being is that I had to order quite a few parts for this. So the first part of this video was actually recorded quite a few weeks ago. So I'm actually trying to remember exactly what was wrong with it. But I do remember now, don't worry. I'm here, even though it is 11 o'clock at night. So yeah, setting lever screw completely broken. The yoke obviously had jumped as well off of the winding pinion, but that wouldn't have made a difference anyway, especially with the setting lever gone. But you'll see later on the parts that I had to order, and one of them in particular, I was mad surprised. So for this wheel, again, a bit of a bad design on the Valjoux 72, but I'm assuming they had some special tool for this. You need a special Presto tool to remove these wheels. The problem is, with the 72, it has a gap. So when you're using the Presto tool, it's not a normal Presto, it's especially for these wheels. There's a gap on between these bridges, so you can't get clearance. Once you push down, it will just slide down. So what I do is I just use like an old ratchet wheel to basically create a bridge between the two bridges. Bridge. That way, when I'm pushing down on the Presto, it has something to actually sit on and then pull up the wheel straight. And another thing is you need to really be careful with it, because that fourth wheel has got two extended pivots, one on each side. So one for that wheel, and then the other side is also for where one of the hands goes. And they are very easy to bend, and they're also expensive if you mess it up. So that's also something you need to take care of. So the train bridge now I'm going to take off. And underneath you will see the escape wheel. And the fourth wheel with the extended, super long extended pivots. And even though I've took off that train wheel bridge, you can take out the escape wheel, but you cannot take out the fourth wheel because it's too long. So you still need to remove the big, massive barrel bridge that's on the Valjoux 72 first. That's held in with 3 screws. Now another thing, what not everyone notices, but one of those screws is a little bit shorter than the other 2. So you also need to make sure you put those back in the right place as well. So just gently pry it off with the tip of your screwdriver just to create a little bit of leverage. You don't have to go crazy on it. It will come, just take your time. And underneath this is where the ratchet wheel is, the crown wheel core, the click, etc, etc. It's all actually bolted underneath the barrel bridge. It's quite ingenious. And this is where we see the magic. So I could take out the center wheel, third, fourth, escape wheel's already gone. And have you guys noticed what the problem is yet? I didn't notice straight away, but now I know what it is. You can see it. I was shocked when I saw this, seriously. And I think whoever decided to keep going to town on this, it's not normal. Look at the state of that ratchet wheel. I have never in my whole time working on watches seen any wheel with that amount of teeth missing. I don't even know where the teeth are. Unbelievable. So obviously no wonder this watch wouldn't run. Problem is it gets worse from there. Because whoever used to own this decided, no, I will still keep trying to wind it, they actually caused quite a bit of damage to a lot of the 12-hour chronograph parts, because they're actually connected up with the, oh, my mind's gone blank. The ratchet wheel is on top of the barrel, and the barrel also is connected to parts which connect to the 12-hour chronograph. And it did cause a lot of damage along the chain, so to speak. So quite a few parts, especially in regards to the 12-hour chronograph, had to be replaced because a lot of the teeth were just messed up, and they're very fine teeth as well on those wheels. The crown wheel also got replaced as well because the teeth were damaged on that. The core was fine, but the crown wheel was also replaced. There weren't teeth missing, but they were definitely dinted because of the amount of force that had been put into this, still trying to wind it, even though it was very clear that this thing didn't want to wind. So off comes the click, and the click spring is also under there as well. But it's such a massive bridge on the Valjoux 72s. I mean, it literally covers about 3/4 of the whole watch. So now I can continue tackling the 12-hour chronograph parts on the dial side. So the conveyor spring and the conveyor, they come out. Also this bridge that covers the 12-hour runner wheel. It's held on with a spring as well, which presses down. And if you're not too careful, it will jump. There you go. There you go. And that 12-hour wheel was also damaged. The teeth are so fine on those chronograph wheels. They don't look, they're like really sharp, pointy little teeth. In order to actually see them in detail, you really need to look under a microscope because they are really that fine. And unfortunately, there was a lot of damage on those as well. Very blunted. So off comes the conveyor. And now I'm removing, yeah, I can't remember the name for it. It's like a little bridge. It's basically just like a dial support bridge so that the dial can sit on it. think this is a conveyor bridge. Again, sometimes my memory with the name of parts goes amiss. Maybe you guys can help me out sometimes. But it is late, so I'm allowed. But I must admit, I've said it before, but the Valjoux 72, absolutely my favorite movement ever. It is the ultimate workhorse chronograph. It's obviously old, it's obviously obsolete, but as far as I'm concerned, as a column wheel chronograph, man, there's nothing better. I love working on them, and they just run. They really do. Great power reserve, and they run. And of course, they look highly impressive as well. I mean, some of the best watches in the world still have the Valjoux 72s in, like a Rolex Daytona, for example, Valjoux 72. All of the Enicar high-end chronographs will be a Valjoux 72, or it'll be one of the more recent ones like the 726, which pretty much is a 72. I believe it just has a higher beat. So that's the minute wheel out and the intermediate wheel. Also removed the setting lever spring, which was in good condition. Just inspecting the rest of these parts as I'm breaking down the keyless. So the screws that are holding in the yoke spring, make sure you keep a finger over that so it doesn't fly across the room. And then I can remove the yoke as well. And I've said it before, with a super annoying yoke screw. Super annoying, that screw. Always have difficulty putting it back in. It's a real pain in the ass. So as you can see, there are a lot of parts in a chronograph movement. A lot of parts, but there's a lot going on. So now that the movement's completely stripped down, I'm putting the balance back because obviously it's going to get cleaned with everything else, and as I've said before, it's definitely the safest place to keep it. So pop it back on, very straightforward, screw it down, and you're good to go. So for the mainspring, obviously you want to get it out of the barrel. And it consists of a few parts. So you've got the barrel cap, you've got the barrel, the mainspring inside, and of course you've got the arbor as well. So you pop it open, you crack it open basically, it's friction fit. And then inside you have the arbor, which you want to unhook. You need to be careful with this as well because you have a spring in there which is held under a massive amount of tension. And you don't want that flying around. So really, it's advisable to keep a finger at least on top of that mainspring. Sometimes the arbors don't want to come out, so rather than forcing it, I will just basically let it win the situation, and I will just remove the mainspring while the arbor is still attached, and then I will remove it later. So now basically I just want to prepare the case because I want to give this an ultrasonic clean, and we need to get all that man cheese out of there, remove the old gasket. So first I'm removing the pushers, and they're really straightforward. They're just held in with a screw thread on the inside. So you just, like a normal screw, you just turn it anti-clockwise. You can pull it out of the back, and then from the front, the pusher cap and the spring underneath that will just fall away. And that means obviously from a cleaning perspective, you can clean these a hell of a lot easier. Just don't lose the spring. And that one's a little bit bent, but I think I can straighten it, so I'm not overly concerned. So now I'm removing the old gasket, and luckily it is just hardened. Old gaskets do one of two things. They're either rock solid like this one, and you have to pick them out, or the other thing is they're actually turned into a nasty meshy goo like tar, and that's even worse. So some serious hammer time on this crystal to get it out because those things are in hard. So once the old crystal's out, and the case is ready, I can basically get that ready for the ultrasonic. And before we do that, I want to make sure that I'm basically cleaning everything down. So this is called pegging the jewels, as you've heard before. You want to make sure that you get some pegwood, clean everything really well, because the cleaner does a good job, but it's a lot better if you do pre-cleaning first. Preparation is definitely very, very important. And there we have it, guys. A lot of parts for cleaning. You see those broken parts, so that's the broken setting lever and the broken ratchet wheel. So I'm just putting in the case, pushers, case pack, etc. into the ultrasonic. Give this a wash for around 10 minutes. So everything cleaned now, professional deep cleaning in the Elmer Super Automatic Cleaner. I love this cleaner, man, seriously. So we can start with the rebuild now of this super juicy watch, and yeah, new mainspring is in order, guys. New mainspring is in order. So it's a hand winder, so I'm going to put in some 1300 into the barrel before I put in the new mainspring. You know, mainsprings for most watches, they're not very expensive. Even though the Valjoux 72 is an expensive watch, you can get mainsprings for around 15-20 bucks. And considering you don't know when it was last serviced, it's definitely advisable. I mean, if you're gonna pay for a service, why stringe on like an extra 15-20 bucks on a new mainspring, so you know it's gonna not have any kinks or broken, etc., etc., or anything like that. It's just strongly advisable. And basically you just press this in. Now most of the time with new mainsprings, they're color coded. I've mentioned this before. This one wasn't, so I had to double check which way it went in, because if you get it the wrong way, like as if it's winding from the left to the right, that's going to be a big problem. So I had to double check and make sure I got it in the right way. So once you've got it in and the arbor's in as well, then you can just put on the barrel cap, and then it's just press fit down with this nice little cheap tool, but it just closes everything perfectly in alignment, so you're not going to risk putting more stress on one side of it than the other. Highly recommended tool, and you can get those on eBay for, I don't know, 10 bucks. They're really not expensive. I mean, I think you can get a Bergeon one for like 40 bucks, but it's a piece of plastic, man. So once the new mainspring's put in, I am gonna basically now tackle the capstones, one on each side of the balance, and they're held in with these two Enicar block springs. And you just want to carefully just push those out from their lock position, and then you can basically take out the capstones. So I give it some fixer drop treatment. This is so that when I re-oil it, the oil doesn't disperse everywhere and get all juiced, because you don't want that. You just want a little bit of oil. And fixer drop is the best way to keep the oil all in one place. It just stops it moving around. And for this kind of thing, you definitely need a loop. Just a small magnifier, like a 3x mag, it's not sufficient. You want to really get up close to see what you're doing. And once you've oiled the jewel, then you can just put the cap back on, and it will basically, with the oil, it will stick to the other piece, and yeah, it's not going to come away again anytime soon anyway. And it'll create a nice little bubble of oil underneath, and that's what you want. So that when you put it back on the watch and the balance staff goes into the jewel, it's permanently suspended with this nice little drop of oil. I'm using 9010 on this. Very, very fine oil, and that's perfect for this kind of job. Then carefully just pop it back in, and then you want to close the ink box spring again. And that's it. Pretty straightforward. Are they fiddly? Yeah, they are fiddly. Will you lose them and drop them and all things like that when you're first starting out? Yeah, you will. A lot of choice words will come from your direction, I guarantee you that. And nothing worse than losing one of those things, because those things are small. Don't even think about using a magnet to try and find it. It's not metal, so you're screwed. I've just realized, because this video has been done, and it's been done over the course of a few weeks because of waiting for parts, etc. I think I'm wearing 3 different watches throughout the whole shooting of this video, because it was in 3 different parts. So you saw that I had a Sherpa Graph Mark III on. You've seen me now just with a Sherpa Graph Mark II-A, and I think later on, I think I've got an Ops on as well. Hey, at least I kept it real, and they're all Enicars, so that's a cool thing. So just doing exactly the same process for the dial side. Tiny drop of oil, between 50 and 80% of the circumference of the capstone is more than enough. I usually keep it around just a bit over half the size, because once you push it on, it will also spread a bit, and the last thing you want is for it to basically run over the edges, because that will be disastrous, and then you'll have to do it again. It's funny because actually using too much oil on watches can be just as bad as not using any oil at all. With watches, it's all about finding the balance. I've said this before, things just fit right. If anything feels forced, it's a problem. And when it comes to oiling as well, less is definitely better than more. So now that that's done, I can remove the balance altogether and put it away until we need it later on. I'll just turn it upside down, and I just put it on a cushion, and then I just keep it to one side. And also dust cover it now as well, because it's clean, you know, you don't want dust going on there now unnecessarily. So little 1300 where the setting lever screw is going to go, the nice shiny new one. And I just give it a little screw, even though I'm not screwing it into anything. I'm just basically just working the oil around. And now we've got a new setting lever as well underneath. And then just holding it in place with my finger so that I can screw it in from the other side. It can be a little bit tricky sometimes. Sometimes they can slip on your finger and then you need to try it again, but it's not particularly difficult. So a little 1300 where the center wheel will go, and also a little 1300 as well where the bottom of the arbor will go for the barrel bridge, sorry, the mainspring barrel. Speaking of which, just popped in the mainspring barrel. And again, a little 1300 on the arbor for where the new replaced ratchet wheel will go. And as an example of parts, this ratchet wheel, I think this from the supplier I got this from, top of my head, I think it was 40 euros. And that's actually quite cheap, because some of the websites I see, they're quite a lot more money than that. But this is what I'm trying to say, is when you start building these parts up in price, it adds up. They're not cheap, especially if you need more than one thing. So new crown wheel. I added some grease 9504 to the bottom of it because it's metal on metal. And now I'm just adding a little bit of 1300 just on the inside of the edge of it, because now I'm going to put in the crown wheel core, and it's obviously going to rotate against that. So you want to make sure that you lubricate it as well. Held in with 2 screws. And now I can move over to where the click and the click spring goes. So little 1300 on the post for where the click will go. And that's just held in with just the one screw. And the click spring also now been added. And I'll add just a little bit of grease to that as well, where it connects with the click. Because obviously when you wind it, it's going to rub against that. So you want to make sure that you lubricate it just a little bit. And that's engaging pretty nice. So now I can start to build up the trainer wheels. So first the escape wheel. And you just build it up in a normal fashion. So I always start with the escape wheel obviously, and then you build up because everything's going a little bit higher than the next one. So you've actually got no choice, you've got to do it that way. So in goes the fourth with the super extended pivots. Now the third. And then finally I'll put in the center wheel in the middle. They're really nice colored wheels as well, these really nice brassy color. And once they're all in and you've got them lined up, then you want to put on the barrel bridge. And like I mentioned before, this is a huge bridge. It looks a little bit more daunting than what it actually is, quite simply because you're actually only really got 2 points that you need to connect, the third wheel and the mainspring barrel there, where the top of the arbor basically. Those are the only 2 points that you're needing to get lined up. There's nothing else actually under there. The only one thing that I would say is just pull back on the click sometimes so that it connects with the ratchet wheel as well. And then once you've got it engaged, because it's quite heavy as well, it sinks down a lot easier. One advice I would say as well with that barrel bridge is loosen off the screws a little bit, because if you've screwed them down when you've put them back without an item being there, you run the risk of them being a little bit too low and it won't sit flush. So just loosen those screws off a little bit. So I put the trainer wheel bridge in as well, and then once you have got everything basically aligned, make sure that everything's running freely, you can screw everything down correctly. And as you're screwing it down, just make sure that you're giving everything a little bit of a check to make sure that everything's still turning freely. And it looks pretty good. So next I will just give it some oil. So a little bit of 90-10 on the fourth wheel and the escape wheel. And also some 90-10 on the third. And then I put a little bit of 1300 on the center wheel as well. And I can't stress it enough, if you can see the amount of oil that you're putting on with your naked eye, then you've put on far too much. It really is as simple as that. You shouldn't see the amount that you put on with your naked eye. So I turn the movement over and I just repeat the process on the other side. Same oils, exactly the same. And now I'm just adding a little bit of 9504 grease to the center wheel post, and this is basically where the cannon pinion is going to slide over. Cannon pinion's friction fit, so you just need to press it on and then you can press it down with your tweezers and you'll hear it click into place most of the time. So I'm just moving the ratchet wheel just a little bit just to see that I can see it turning and it's engaging correctly. So I've added some 9504 to the winding pinion now. And I'm popping that in place, building up the keyless. And then the sliding pinion also gets added as well. And then I can pop in the crown. If it wants to go. So continue building it up, and little 1300 to these posts where the minute wheel, intermediate wheels will go. There's two intermediate wheels on the Valjoux 72 because it's such a big watch. Needs two. I can't stress it enough how much I love working on these movements. Such a beautiful design, and it just works perfectly. It really does. But guys, if you're liking this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit a like on this. Please subscribe to my channel as well. I noticed that I'm actually close to 1,000 subscribers now. Super fresh, super nice. Need that monetization. I want YouTube to start paying me instead of making money off of me. I want to make some money too. So like I said, if you like what I'm doing, please hit a like. You can also subscribe and feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. I do pretty much try and reply to everybody as well that hits a comment. And I really value the comments. It's great feedback. Some of the stuff makes me laugh. Some of the stuff's also informative, and some of the stuff I also learn as well from what you guys are saying, and I think that's what it's all about, especially when it comes to watches. It's about sharing the knowledge, and I certainly don't know everything, and it's also nice for me to learn as well. So just building up the keyless works, I've added in the yoke and the yoke spring, and I'm just adding a little bit of 9504 grease between that, just so it helps with the lubrication when things are being used. Metal on metal parts definitely is something you want to lubricate and make sure that they run smooth and free. So now that they're in place, I can put in the setting lever spring. It also works as a plate as well, so it completely covers the two intermediate wheels, and it also covers part of the minute wheel as well, which is absolutely imperative, because if you didn't have that and you were basically setting the time, those wheels would basically jump off their posts. They would not stay, they need to be held down. So once they're in place, now I'll turn the movement over and I'm going to work on the pallets. So the pallets, they gotta also get some fixer drop treatment, because it is super important that you oil the exit jewel on the pallet forks so that it hits all of the escape wheel teeth. Super shiny. Look at the gleam on those non-real jewels. Non-real. So I just put it in the pallet cock, and I'm just basically holding it down a little bit while I put a little bit of wind in. So I just want to make sure that it's properly engaged. And you can test this by moving it backwards and forwards. And once you're confident, then you can screw it down. So I'll give it a further wind now and I'll test it again. And you just tap it from left to right, and basically what you're looking for is that it springs away from you, as you can see on the video. And that basically means that it is operating correctly. Once that's done, I am going to add in the balance. And some of you guys might be thinking, hey, HB man, you said that you only add the balance at the end when you finish the watch. And that's true. But when it comes to a chronograph, not the case. The reason being is that it's a watch which is more complicated and there's a lot more to it. So I was always told, treat it as a separate thing. Build up the watch to the point that it's actually a functional watch, which is the stage we're at now, meaning that there's no chronograph parts on there. But if we stuck a dial on this and a set of hands, it would tell the time. And then I leave it for a day. I had to anyway, I needed parts. But basically I do it like that so that it gives time for the oils to sink in, etc., etc. And it also gives you a break as well, because it's like doing it's like doing two watches in one. It's, you know, it takes longer than doing an automatic watch, let's say. So once you're ready, and now as you can see, we are moving on to building up the chronograph. So a little bit of 9504 grease, because the pusher will push against this, and obviously as you can see it's literally touching and rubbing on the side of the movement. So on goes the column wheel. Such a beautiful design, and it actually looks really cool as well when you actually look at it. Held on by one big juicy ass screw. But I'm curious, what's your guys' favorite chronograph? I mean, you know that Valjoux 72 does it for me. But it's not the only chronograph out there. I mean, you have many different makes. You have Landeron, you have Venus. Well, I mean, I suppose Venus is Valjoux, really, if you think about the history behind it. You have the Zenith movements. Of course, you have Lemania as well. Also, love Lemania. I mean, a lot of the Omegas, like the 861, the 865, the Lemania-based movements. And yeah, they're beautiful. They're also really nice to work on. Completely different way of working, but they also function very, very well. So I believe this is the hammer spring. And I can continue building up the chronograph. It's important to do it in order as well. Now, I'm not saying that my way is the right way of doing it, but there's certain things that you need to put on first before you can put on other things. Because if you do it later, there's going to be things in the way. I see it as kind of like working on imagine working on a small car, like a Mini or something. I ain't talking about the new Mini, I'm talking about the back in the day Mini. I used to know a mechanic back in the day, and he used to work on a lot of Minis. I also used to like Minis when I was younger. I had 3. And the problem is that the engine's so small, the engine bay is so small, that you would have to remove so many different things to get to the part that you needed. And I see it exactly the same with this. Because you have a lot going on in such a small area, and there's parts that are virtually sitting on top of each other, it is important that when you're rebuilding it, that you're trying to remember that you're working in a backwards fashion, let's say. But again, this is something that's practice, and the more that you do it, the more you get used to it. But also don't forget as well that you're also living in a modern age. So you also now have the functionality of taking pictures. That's something that I do advise as well, especially with people who are starting out. If you're not sure about something, like for example, if you've never done this before, take photographs. I used to originally, I would take reference photographs. What you find is that the more that you do something is, the less that you need kind of referencing, so to speak. Things become a lot more natural. It's like anything in life. Yeah, the more you practice, the more good you get at it. And that's just simply how it is. But I would strongly advise, I was asked this before, like people, oh, how do you remember that? And I would say it to people, there is nothing wrong with taking yourself photographs. Take some photographs as you go. Everyone's pretty much got a phone nowadays with a camera on. And you can just take reference pictures as you go along. So that way you're not going to get completely stuck. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot more to it, obviously, that's involved with certain things. But from a visualization point of view, I think that reference photographs is a very logical and important thing when it comes to learning. You have something to fall back on, let's say. Yep, I'm still wearing that Sherpa Graph Mark IIA super juicy watch. Damn, that watch is so nice. So, still continuing it up. And now we just add on the next spring. I think this is actually the hammer spring, thinking about it. Yeah, there we go. But it's great, again, like I said, is everything works in conjunction with each other perfectly. And as long as you lay it out right, then there's no reason why it won't. I mean, obviously, as long as the parts aren't completely screwed. But it's like everything just works in unity with each other. And yeah, I find it, I really do, I find it both mystical and absolutely magical. So this is all held under tension with one spring now as well. And the easiest way with this is basically, I find, to lay it in place so that it's held in with the screw. I screw it in about halfway, so I know it's not going to fly anywhere. And then I apply tension. And to apply the tension, I will basically just slide it from its position on the right, and I want to slide it to the left over the little stud. There you go. Click, and then it locks in place and it's under tension. And then I can screw the rest of it down afterwards. So a little bit of 90-10 to the coupling wheel. Because obviously once it's on, you're not going to be able to oil it. Well, you can from the top, but you're not going to be able to oil the bottom of it. And this just sits on, and it's quite a clever design as well. It's only held in by one screw. Looks like it's held in by two, but the other screw that you see, it's not an actual screw, it's an eccentric screw, and that's for the manipulation of adjusting the distance of where this wheel will sit in conjunction with the other wheels, because you don't want them touching too close to each other, but of course you want them touching, otherwise they're not going to engage. And that's what the eccentric screws are about. When it comes to eccentric screws as well, if your chronograph is running great and everything's in order, you know, it snaps over when it's supposed to, etc., etc., don't touch those screws. Because if you do, you're going to basically misalign everything, and then you're going to have to end up messing around trying to get everything back into alignment from a chronograph running perspective. So we're nearly there now in regards to finishing off the chronograph. I'm just adding in the springs so that everything's been held under tension. Whoops, there goes the screw. You gotta watch those screws, you know, they're small. And this is why it's always handy to use pegwood as well in regards to situations like this, so that you can keep things in place. So a little bit of 9504 grease. I use this for all of my spring parts, because every time that you're pressing the chronograph, these springs are reacting, and it's metal on metal, so they will rub, and you want to basically be using this kind of lubrication to avoid any unnecessary wear. Again, same principle there, half screw in, then set it into place, and then I screw the rest. So now I can turn the movement over and build up the 12-hour chronograph side of things. First of all, just put it in this little space bridge. It just creates where the dial sits basically, so that it creates space so that everything underneath the dial has room to breathe, so to speak, and obviously it's not going to touch things that it shouldn't do, etc, etc. Held in with 2 screws. Hey look, I've got an ops on, so you can see that this part was filmed later on as well. So that's 3 watches that I've been wearing for the duration of this, and as you can see, the new parts arrived. So these parts are all for the 12-hour chronograph. They were screwed and they needed replacing, so I got them ordered in. They weren't cheap, but that's what happens when you don't look after a watch. And especially if you're going to keep trying winding it to the point that it just completely removes more teeth than a left on a ratchet wheel. Man, I still can't believe the state of that ratchet wheel. I think I should use that actually as my thumbnail post. So now I'm just adding in the conveyor and the spring for it as well. So a little bit of oil as well where I put the screw in, because it will just react against that. The screw actually just nips just part of it in place. And then there's a little friction spring that holds on the other side, and that just keeps the wheel in place as well, because on top of that you're going to put on the 12-hour chronograph runner wheel. So this massive conveyor spring, which is absolutely huge, held in with 1 Watoon size screw. And again, I screw it in halfway, and then I will just pull it basically and align it into place. And it's not a super strong spring. What I mean is that it's, what's the word I'm looking for? You have a lot of flexibility with it basically. So I'm not at risk of breaking it basically. It's quite bendy, and I'm just popping that in place. I did make a correction on this because I actually pulled it a little bit too far. It should be a little bit further in than what you see in the video. That is, it shouldn't be resting exactly where it's resting now. So a little 1300, sorry, not 1300, a little 9010, where the pivot for the 12-hour chronograph runner wheel is going to go. We've got a shiny new one. And that will just sit in place, super nice. And we're getting towards the end of this. Now it's held in with this one bridge or cock, because it's only 1 screw. And I find it interesting as well with this, because you have 2 holes. So you have the whole hole where you screw it in, and the other hole basically is open and visible, showing the jewel underneath. And the only thing that I can think of is it like that because maybe you forgot to oil the jewels, and then rather than having to remove it, you still have access to oil that jewel if you need to. Personally, I do it before, but that's the only thing that I can think of. This is like a reset arm, so basically when you push the pusher, the blade will hit against the heart underneath the runner wheel and basically reset it back to 12 o'clock. Again, completely ingenious design. So cool. And I just want to give that a quick test once I've done it. First, we need to arm it with the spring. And this spring will push underneath the bridge, connect against it, and then it's held down under one screw. And then it has another screw which basically creates a bit of tension on it. And the easiest way I find is just to pull the spring back with a screwdriver. Otherwise you're not going to get the screw in. It's in the way of the hole, basically, the spring, so you need to pull it away in order to create that access. And then, as you can see, it's armed correctly and we have got our tension. So once the movement's been finished on that side, the last thing that we're putting on now is the switch. And this connects, you can see the top rod from the conveyor. And that hits against the switch, obviously, when you're setting the chronograph and resetting it. So a little 1300 to the cannon pinion, and then I can put on the hour wheel. And just quickly check that it's engaging with the minute wheel as well, which it is. And then I can put on the dial washer. And we're getting close, guys. Getting super close. And it is dial time. Very nice condition dial as well, as you can see. Make sure you use plastic tweezers when you're holding things like hands and dials. Don't use the brass ones. Not cool. You do not want to cause unnecessary scratches to someone's dial. No, sir. They would be super pissed. So when you fit the dial is held into place by two dial feed screws, and they're on the other side of the movement. They're not on the side like most watches. They're not on the side at all. And now we can set the hands. So first I'm starting off with the chronograph hands, the small subdial hands. And you just want to set these in place. Make sure that you're arming it to 12 o'clock, obviously, before you push it down, because that's the reset position. So the 12 hours done. Now doing the minute chronograph. All friction fit, like most hands, if not all hands. And then the small seconds counter, which will constantly turn. And this one has a really long arm on it, so to speak, because the pivot for the seconds hand it's very low within the watch. So it has this really long tube on the arm, on the hand, sorry. So you need to make sure that you align it right. You can actually, when you put it in, miss it completely, the pivot, and it'll just sink. So yeah, you need to obviously make sure that you arm it. So now that they're on, I can do the hour hand and the minute hand, and obviously the chronograph hand. No date on the Valjoux 72, so you can put the hour hand on wherever you want, then set it to 12, then put on the minute hand, and then obviously stick on your chronograph sweeper at the end. Make sure that your hands are not touching, obviously, as well, very important. And make sure that your hour hand has got enough clearance above all of the subdial chronograph hands, because again, it will stop the watch. And last but not least, you're going to put on your chronograph sweeper. And I take extra special care with that one. You want to make sure that you get it on right, and you want to make sure that you get it on 12 or as close as possible. Give it a quick check. Boom. Looks like it's working pretty fresh. I always stop it as well around 30 seconds because it's the furthest point for where the reset will be. So it creates the maximum amount of stress. So you're basically looking so that it does reset on 12. And I was quite happy with that. So all we need to do now is basically case up the watch, get it on the Timergraph. So new crystal is already been put on. I've already put that on the watch. So you pop the movement in, flip it over. I put the crown in. I don't fit it completely in. I just basically just put it in so that it holds the movement in place as well. Because if you try screwing it in while it's loose without a movement holder, you're going to just twist the movement. So in goes the movement holder. And basically just press that in with your fingers. And then you can put in the two movement holder screws with the little tabs. This is the one I was telling you about where you need to remove the spring, which I had to loosen it. You just have to loosen the spring, move it out of the way, and then you have access to basically fit the movement holder screw. And then the other one on the other side, and then the balance that's being done now as well. So once that's done, I will basically reattach the spring, also tighten up the setting lever screw for the crown. And there we have it, guys. Make sure that the chrono is engaging from the pushers, etc, etc. And it's looking pretty good. Guys, if you like this video, please hit a like on it. I would super appreciate it. Feel free to subscribe to my channel as well. If you do subscribe, you're going to know exactly when I will be dropping the next Horology Biology goodness. And then you're going to know when you can watch what I have. So I'm adding in a new gasket to this. I've already put some grease on the gasket. And then just obviously just pop it in. It has a groove channel, so yeah. Sometimes they can be a little bit annoying, but once you get it, it's actually easy to do it while it's greased than not. If you do it while it's dry, it's even harder. So it's always advisable to use silicone grease. And then I can put on the case back. And then I will just tighten it up with a special, purely for the Enicar Sherpa Graphs, tightening wrench. So on the Timergraph, I haven't regulated it properly yet, so this is what it looks like from service, and I'm pretty happy with that. That's a pretty damn good result. And there we have it, guys. The Enicar Sherpa Graph Mark IV, the reference 07200201 with the Valjoux 72 movement, full stainless steel 40mm watch. Guys, until next time.